Okay, so I want to talk about a build concept for Bleed Falconer, and I'm going to put some gameplay at the end, so if you want to skip to that, go right ahead. And this is going to be dealing with Explosive Trap and Acid Flask for Bleed Falconer. And that sounds crazy to most people, it should, because at a baseline you would say net puncture, and with no investment, with no gear, I would 100% agree. But I want to explain why I think at the end game level with an investment in prepped gear that this is actually superior because of what you're getting. So let's look at the trade-offs here. Net puncture gives a ton of base bleed in the skills themselves. Explosive Trap and Acid Flask gives 0. So what are we getting in terms of bleed? We're getting a ton of raw hits because we're throwing 4 traps. Any trap that leads near an enemy gets thrown again, and any of those traps that are thrown again proc an Acid Flask. So the raw number of hits means we have a very respectable amount of bleed because we are a bleed build. So we have about 83% base, and then with Crimson Shroud stacks, we're up to 233. Between these gloves, which give 182%, our passive tree giving 50%, and 200% from Rending Talons in the skill tree here, we give a huge amount of that over to our Falcon to carry a big amount of the weight, and then all the number of traps supplement the rest. Now, what else do we get here? The biggest thing, and the main reason that I personally made the switch, is defensive utility. Net puncture lacks defensive utility. Dust Shrouds help us cover that. We can easily maintain 25 to 50 Dust Shroud and Sky Signal stacks, which means Dust Shroud wise, we have 100% glancing blow chance, and we can easily maintain 70+% dodge rating, which is huge defensive layers that you cannot get from net puncture. And then we can also gain anywhere from 20 to 90% physical penetration, as well as feeding into our loop of resetting our cooldowns, which just coincides with Talon of Valor also resetting our cooldowns. So that's what we get from Explosive Trap. On the Acid Flask side, we're getting a ton of armor shred chance, which doesn't help the bleed, but helps all these raw hits, which we're doing a lot of damage with Falcon Strike and Dive Bomb, and even these 2 skills with how many times they hit. So a lot of value there. We're also getting more damage over time through Efficacious Toxins here in the poison pools, so that is helping the bleed. We're given a little bit of global poison chance to ourselves and in turn our Falcon. And then because these are getting thrown at enemies, we don't even have to aim them, we're also getting a little bit of utility here with the blind chance. So between the blind chance, the Dust Shrouds giving us dodge and glancing blow, we get a lot of defensive utility, and we're not sacrificing much because of the raw hits. The other thing to note with the hits is Avian Arsenal. Because the loop we're going to be doing, we're going to use Falcon Strike while throwing traps at the ground, and there's so many traps in Acid Flask that we can easily get pretty much up to this 10 stack limit. And we're doing throwing attacks, and we have synergy with that because we're building throwing rings for mana sustain, so we've got about 60 throwing damage total, just from 1, 2, 3, and then the passive tree, 10, plus 50% of that is being converted by this node to our Falcon, and then all the value we get from all the Avian Arsenal procs, which we're getting more consistently because of all the hits. So that's what I want to talk about there, is all this utility and all the extra hits we accumulate ends up supplementing our damage and making this a much more comfortable playstyle. It's super tough to see exactly which does more damage, especially here, because this training dummy will not proc our mana sustain through Rapid Pursuit and Hunter Spoil, which during normal monoliths, and especially bossing, we have no issues as long as we're paying a little bit of attention. And then the boss dummy won't proc our Trap Sprinkler or Trap Richet, which means we don't get any of the extra hits or any of the acid flasks. So it's tough to showcase here. I'm gonna show the loop, but just know that we'll be able to get way more stacks in the actual gameplay because we won't have the mana issues. So what you want to do is attack with Falcon Strikes while you throw traps around the enemy. Not at the enemy, around. And boom, we got 400 bleed stacks before we use our dive bomb for the instant damage. And the reason we're throwing our traps around the enemy is because of the Dust Shroud node here. It needs a little bit of time to boost up our chance to get the Dust Shrouds. And then the Trap Sprinkler and Trap Ricochet throw all the traps at the enemy for us. So, as you see, with bleed, we build up a ton of bleed stacks. And then we expunge that all with our dive bomb damage at the end. And we just continue that loop over and over as we walk around the enemy. Ideally, you want to stay in the pools, but it's not a huge deal. So that's the core loop. That's how the gameplay works. I found it very interesting that once you had investment, these two skills were superior to all the synergy you find in net puncture with bleed when there's zero inherent synergy at a base level from these two skills. But I think that more probably has to do with Explosive Trap skill tree being very overtuned overall, but we'll leave that for another day. Hope everyone enjoyed, and have a good one.
Not happening. Happening. Not happening. Not happening.
quality of pain, unchanging.